Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have a liftoff.
Two Doomed Men podcast, the greatest, ready? The greatest podcast in the history of the country, perhaps even the world by far. I don't think anyone comes close.
Always love the Trump impersonator. What's up, Doom Nation? Welcome back. You are listening to the Two Doom Men podcast. As always, it's Skaggs and yours truly, the Captain. We have a very special episode for you today. Skaggs, why don't you introduce our returning friend?
Yes, sir. I am excited. Mr. Scott Horton has returned to the podcast for the first time since the actual war in Ukraine began. We are going to be talking about his new book, which I got right here. I know you got in the background over there, Scott, Provoked. I'm excited to have you back to, pick your mind about it. Thank you for taking the time to join us, man. How you doing?
Thank you both very much for having me. Great to be here.
Yes, thank you for coming on.
So a lot has changed since the last time we had you on. We had you on almost like right before the war started, when there was kind of like that whole panic going on way back when. It feels like now. It's almost like 3 years. Your book is now out. I suggest everybody go and get it. I haven't had the time yet to go through the whole thing. It is quite the read, or it's quite the undertaking, at least. I showed it last time we had an episode. But wanted to pick your brain in general, and I thought, Scott, I could start with, we had a debate on our podcast about a year ago now, I think it was, Cap.
A little bit,
it was right around the time that the Oppenheimer movie came out. We had a friend of ours. His dad was a big Truman fan, and we had him on to kind of debate the whole morality and Truman, the whole nukes in Japan and all that stuff.
Okay.
And I don't want to get sidetracked by that, although that'd be interesting to talk to you about. But after our debate, where he kind of defended Truman, and me and him went back and forth collegiately, I asked him what he just thought in general about the Ukraine war going on right now. And he said something to me that I'd never forget to this day. He said, "Where do you get a straight line on any of that stuff?" And I didn't think much about it at the time, but I'm like, damn it, that's a good question. Now, where do I go to get a straight line on any of that stuff? Scott Horton is where I go to get a straight line on any of that stuff. But I wanted to start off by kind of asking you that same question. Where do you go to get a straight line on any of this stuff when it comes to the wars, especially Ukraine? All the states lie. Right. Vladimir Putin obviously isn't Jesus, like we've said on this podcast before. Our own government has their hands dirty. Where does Scott Horton go to put together this monstrosity of a book to give everybody else a straight line on the war in Ukraine?
So that is a good place to start. I mean, I'm an antiwar.com junkie from way back. I'm the editorial director now, but I was assistant editor, back when I first started. And I'm a Justin Raimondo guy. I mean, he died in 2019, but he was so good on all of this stuff. When I first started reading Justin, I had read, a little bit of stuff in 99, but I'm not sure if I had caught on to who he was or what. But I started reading him in, would have been the end of 01 or the very beginning of 02. And just immediately my take was, this is the only guy who has any idea what's going on. Like, no one else is right. I thought a Republican meant James Baker III, but that wasn't right. And what was happening in 2002 was not James Baker III taking us to war in Iraq for Exxon, but it was Richard Pearl taking us to war in Iraq for Israel.
Mm-hmm.
It's an entirely different set of questions than what someone might have thought. Not that I was just a Democrat or whatever, but I'm from Texas, and James Baker III to me was always like, you know, the Dark Lord of the Sith behind the throne, the all-powerful WASP oil lawyer, Council on Foreign Relations, state, you know, a Secretary of State. And that's Republican Party politics, Reaganite politics, you know, to a young guy growing up. I start reading Raimondo and I find out that, oh, no. The neoconservatives is this tiny, weird little cult. People say neocon to mean, a war hawk.
Right.
Oh, a neocon is a member of a relatively small group of ex-communists and ex-Truman Democrats, ex-Cold Warrior Democrats who had become Reaganites and then who had all got jobs, well, in the media and in the W. Bush government. And they're the ones who took us to war in Iraq War II. And so when I started reading Raimondo, I was like, hey, you know, I'm sorry, there's just nobody else that I'm reading who knows who's who and what's going on the way that this guy does. So, you know, that to me, you know, he's gone now, but antiwar.com itself and all the staff there and all the regular writers there, I mean, I think they all kind of carry on his legacy of just getting to the bottom of all this stuff. Dave DeCamp, our news editor.
Yeah, he's great.
And Jason Ditz, our senior news editor. I mean, these guys are holding it down for you every single day up there in the top headlines. And then plus all of our analysts, our columnists, people like Ted Snyder, Ray McGovern, and whatever. I mean, these guys have track records. Ron Paul, people talk about Ron Paul like he's a demigod or whatever, just because his philosophy is so good and his voting record is so good or whatever. But he's a brilliant genius. You know that.
Yeah.
He's
excited to have him in that advisory role with Doge.
Yeah. I mean, well, who knows what could even go on there.
Yeah.
But just, you know, his article archive going back 20 years is absolutely an education. So, I mean, that's the answer, right? It's the libertarian right. That's who's good on everything. And the Ron Paulians, and that, you know, obviously includes antiwar.com and the Libertarian Institute. And, you know, my guys, this is who, you know, Kyle Anzalone, our opinion editor at antiwar.com and news editor at the Institute. That's why these guys work for me, is because they're the best. Beyond that, of course, there's, you know, an endless list, depending, you know, on the topic, you know, to narrow it down. But there are, you know, people on the left like the Gray Zone Project, Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mattei and all those guys. And then, you know, there are plenty of people on the right, the American Conservative Magazine, like, I don't know about on everything, but like on, certainly on Russiagate and stuff like that. You've got the Federalist and all those kinds of things. So, you know, I would say, like, if you really want a consistent education in American foreign policy, you just stick with antiwar.com. Our top news headlines every day and our regular, you know, 7 columnists every day, our regular 7 opinion pieces. That will see you through. And you know what? Like, there was a time when, and I used to do a lot more interviews than I do nowadays. I mean, me interviewing others. I'm going to get back to that in the new year. But there was certainly a time when Chalmers Johnson, for example, who wrote Sorrows of Empire and Nemesis, who had been a professor at USC and a contract analyst for the CIA, who had helped write the morning brief for the CIA. Chalmers Johnson said, "You'll get a better education at antiwar.com than the CIA morning brief any day."
I believe that.
This is where you go if you want to know what the hell is really going on around here, because, you know, what can I say? We have exquisite taste. We don't put up with a bunch of crap. We don't run things that are by guys that we like, but even though this piece maybe doesn't hold up, no, we're sticklers. We're only bringing you the best stuff that we can. So, yeah, that's the very long version of, antiwar.com. That's why I'm affiliated with them, because they're the very best.
Yeah, definitely. We always use the articles on our show, especially when it comes to the war stuff.
I mentioned, pardon me, I mentioned Ron Paul, but let me elaborate and say the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. which is run by Daniel McAdams. Ron is the chairman, of course, and everything, but Dan is the director, and they do incredible work, and they have incredible writers over there as well. And Dan and Ron, of course, host the Liberty Report every day, or 4 days a week. And there's just nobody better on foreign policy than. Look, I mean, again, this is not to take away anything from Ron. He's my hero. He's the greatest hero. He's the greatest American who ever lived, if you ask me. I don't think it takes anything away from Ron to say that a huge part of why he is so good is because of Daniel McAdams. That's been his right-hand man for 20 years. So you just can't go wrong when you have the world's greatest foreign policy analyst at your right hand, literally in person every single day.
Yeah, I love the fire Daniel McAdams brings to it too. He's a little feisty. I love it. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, and he brings the same spirit that he very well should too. And it's a perfect balance to Ron, who's such a sweet old country guy. You know what I mean?
Unless he's yelling at fat people back in the day. I always enjoy that clip. Back in the day, yelling at that fat guy in the town hall that he was doing. But so Scott, I agree with you 100% there, man. Obviously, anti-war is great. Obviously, I'm a libertarian, so I'm biased towards libertarians. But there's something to say about the fact that you could go to like Max Blumenthal on foreign policy and war, or Aaron Matei, and those guys are pretty much lefties. I'm sure we disagree with them on like fiscal policy and things like that. But when it comes to war,
you see what it is? It should be obvious to everyone listening to this, right? Libertarians, we're not partisans.
Right.
We're not all married to the Republican or the Democratic Party.
Right.
What we hate and like what we like. Same thing for leftists. Leftists hate Democrats, right? So once you get far enough to the left, the Democrats are right-wing, evil, capitalist, warmonger, whatever's, which is true, right? So so once you get far enough to the left, you're no longer beholden to the Democratic Party. Now you can be good on everything. So, even though, we mock the anti-war left for disappearing on us when Obama came and that kind of thing, all of the very best journalists, I shouldn't say all, but many of the very best journalists on foreign policy are leftists. And because that's their interest and they're good on it. And the fact that they are, believe in some weird sort of Marxoid welfare state or whatever, notwithstanding, what I mean?
One thing about those guys is that none of them are interested in any of the woke stuff at all.
Right.
That's also another tell.
It's positive.
Because why? Because they can see what a scam that is, right?
Exactly.
Like if you're really a political animal and you understand about power and politics, everything is about money. Everything is about who controls what resources, right? Yeah. Who's going to war against who, not who's calling who by what pronoun.
Yeah.
When they deploy that stuff, you should immediately take it first as an insult. They're jerking your chain. They're trying to change your subject. We were all going to go down there and crucify some bankers together before they got us all distracted on this stuff, Yeah.
One of the things I've said on the show is great. A lot of, especially after October 7th, great. A lot of you got the what is a woman right. That's easy. But let me see you have a thoughtful, deep take on the Israel-Palestine conflict. And most of the time they won't. Right. But all right, I don't want to get too sidetracked on that stuff. I do want to talk to you about Ukraine. Of course, it just came out.
And how I am with the tangents. So you guys just
whenever we do. Yeah, we do. So, okay. So interesting that you mentioned the neocons. We do kind of reference neocons as war hawks on this show, but I do know I've heard you talk about it before. The neocons are just a certain group. There's not that many of them in general. I recently read Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago book. And boy, it really shows you how evil an empire the Soviet Union really was, and what people went through in the Gulag system there. Why did the neocons, it was warranted, I guess you could say somewhat, to treat the Soviet Union the way they did. But once the Soviet Union dissipated and went away, why did they continue this policy towards Russia all these years, in your estimation?
Well, I think, one kind of easy way to understand it would be that it wasn't really about Russia at all, right? It's just about America and the American empire, Washington, D.C., not our country. The U.S. government expanding their power and influence throughout the world. And Russia's in the way.
They needed a boogeyman.
Be in the way. Right? It's like Alexander Vindman when Donald Trump wants to change American foreign policy. He says, who the hell are you to change American foreign policy? Right? That's what they all say about Russia. Who are you to tell us what we can't do? There was a time when you were the giant red empire and ruled half of Europe, and we had no choice but to acquiesce on some things. But now your weak, pathetic, rump state, measly, stinking Russian Federation, we can just walk right over you. You can't do anything. And I have quote after quote in the book where a lot of times they're admitting it. Sometimes they're just saying it outright. Sometimes they're admitting it themselves. And then sometimes through self-reflection, they're talking about themselves and their peers' attitude. But you get it over and over again. What are they going to do about it? Mm-hmm. We can do whatever we want. And they're nothing now. So we don't have to respect them. Yeah, they have lots of hydrogen bombs, but that's all they have. And so we're the 800 megaton gorilla. We can do anything, and they can't do anything. It's like asking, how much they care for the sovereignty really of any of these countries that are in their way. I mean, look at
what they do in South America.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? I'm like the worst on that history, but I mean, just like off the top of our heads, like we know of just absolute horrific interventions down there, like the coup in Guatemala that led to a civil war that killed 500,000 people in 1954. All kinds of things like that. But even just in the W. Bush years, where if there's a government that's too friendly to Russia, we just overthrow it. Mm-hmm. And if if the wrong guy wins the election, well, then we'll just claim to have exit polls that say that the right guy won it, and we just throw in $100 million until the thing goes our way. And you see this kind of thing going on in Georgia right now, an attempted color-coded type coup d'etat, sort of, kind of, with the president trying to wrest power away from the parliament and insisting she's going to refuse to leave power because she's legitimate, because she's the Western-backed power, and her faction lost. And so we see this over and over again. So I think that's essentially what it is, right? It's not exactly personal against Russia as much as just Putin is a strong enough leader to maintain independence. And by the way, like I talk about this in the book, this is an ironical kind of thing. People forget where this guy parachuted in from. He parachuted in from Yeltsin's family. He's a product of the sock puppets that America helped to foist on Russia in the 1990s. And then when it was all falling apart at the end and Yeltsin was in such poor health and everything, he went ahead and maneuvered and appointed Putin prime minister and then president on New Year's 2000, and set him up where he's been president ever since then, 25 years since then. But when he first came to power, he was the toast of the town. All of the Yeltsin people loved him. All of the American favored gangsters like Boris Berezovsky favored him. And the American media spun for him when he helped to rig the election. I mean, you would think they had rigged it enough just by appointing a president 3 months early, but he even stuffed ballots to win the election of 2000. And they covered for him. The U.S. State Department said, nah, that was embellished and not that big of a deal. We didn't notice any major irregularities. And, they liked this guy. They invested in him. Bush and the Clinton government and the Bush government. Yeah. And because they thought that he could be made compliant to American wishes.
So I got a question on what you said.
Independent from us, that's like threatening us. But even though it's really not, but if I'm sorry, I'll stop in just one second.
That's fine.
If your doctrine truly is global peace depends on American dominance everywhere at all times, then any threat to American dominance anywhere at all times is a threat to peace. And so even though we don't have a world government, right? We're just talking about the USA world empire. We're under no legitimate authority, really. But, if anyone says that, like, no, you're not sovereign over me, then they become the world's greatest threat, supposedly.
Hitler.
Yeah, everything goes back to Hitler. So my question is, earlier you said that we view Russia as nothing. They just got a few hydrogen bombs. We have a bigger military. And then in the late 90s, early 2000s, when Putin became president, he was the toast of the town because of all the American Western-backed people who were able to put him in charge and go through this election process. Why, what has changed over time? Is he just too strong of a leader? Why are we prodding the bear so hard now through this proxy war that we are going to be on the brink of World War III if Russia's nothing and he's, backed by these Western influences?
Yeah. Well, It's a good point. I mean, it's a very kind of schizophrenic policy in a way, right?
Contradictory almost. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. On one hand, they said all along, ever since the 1990s, that even while they were denying it, the plan all along was neo-containment. In other words, and as I demonstrate in the book, I explain in detail about how this worked. They were promising Russia, we're going to get rid of the alliance. We don't need an alliance anymore because there's no enemy anymore. Now that you guys are not the Soviet Union, but you're just Russia and you're our friends, now we're going to have a partnership. And it's going to be under the CSCE, or then later the PFP, the Partnership for Peace. And so we're going to all kind of be partners in the thing together. So we're not going to redraw the dividing line in Europe. We're going to erase it. We're going to have a common European home, they called it. But that wasn't true. And they admitted that actually their real plan all along was to move the line east. They were never going to bring Russia into, first of all, NATO, but second of all, any new kind of replacement for NATO, like a newly empowered CSCE or PFP in place of NATO, because they're too powerful, right? They're such wimps. We can do whatever we want. What are they going to do about it? But we can't bring them into our alliance because then we'd really have to take their opinion into consideration. They would have veto power as a member of NATO to say that, no, we're not going to do this. Or we're not going to do that.
And God forbid that happens.
They're concerned that Russia would flex its influence over the NATO alliance itself.
Sure.
If they were in it. Yeah.
Yeah. And even if if you just took, for example, oh no, they're totally our friends and they're going to be basically compliant. Well, still, they're going to have opinions that are different than ours on some things, right? And here's a country that, even if their GDP is low, they literally control all of Northern Asia, and they have a mess of hydrogen bombs, and they're not our friends, the West Germans, the British, the French, who are very happy that we came. And, well, I don't know why the West Germans liked us so much. We saved them from the Reds after we whooped their ass in the war. The British and the French are mostly, when the French, vary on this, but they and the Germans have been mostly happy to accept American dominance in Europe, because it's always this weird balancing act between Britain, France, and used to be Spain, no longer Spain, but Britain, France, Germany, and Russia over who is dominant on the continent. And America makes all that moot by saying we are.
Yeah.
Right. And so they've been, the allies, the Western ally democracies have been willing to accept that. Right. And when push comes to shove, they do what they're told. But with the Russians, it's just too much power to share with somebody who just sees things too differently and has too much ability to say no. So the way that they wrote the program, right, almost like it's a computer code, the way they wrote the program was, well, we're moving the line. We're going to bring more and more countries into the Western fold under our nuclear umbrella, under our war guarantee. We're going to move our alliance systems line further and further east and incorporate more and more countries into it, necessarily at the expense of Russia. And so this was a somewhat slow motion process because they were afraid of provoking the Russians. Right. So they did a bit at a time, drove them crazy. Unlike Neil Ferguson said in that debate.
Walking too slow. That killed me, man.
Oh, God. That's so tiresome. They pitched a fit, absolutely, in the 1990s. Now, in the second round of expansion in 2004, in the second round in 2004, they didn't put that much of a fight up because Putin was trying to suck up to W. Bush still. And they had, plenty of other problems at the time. And I guess the idea was that they didn't have any ongoing border disputes with the Baltics. Not really, anyway. And that other priorities would just have to come first. But they still made themselves known that they were upset about it. They didn't want to fight about it then, but they were willing to accept it. What were they going to do about it? Threaten war over it? No, but they still made it known how much they resented it. And especially the fact that it's not just that a promise was made, it's that an agreement was made. If you allow the reunification of Germany, we promise not to move our forces east. And it was on those assurances that they pulled their troops out and let Germany reunify. So as Ted Snyder points out, that's not just a promise, that's a deal. And in fact, even the signed treaty somewhat respected the deal. It didn't say, oh, we promise never to expand NATO anywhere ever in the treaty. But it did say, well, we promise not to expand our military forces into Eastern Germany. That was written in there. Well, doesn't that show that they were respecting the spoken agreement right there? Because if the deal always was, of course, we can expand NATO to include Poland and the Baltics, and we can move our military equipment into Poland and the Baltics, well, then why the hell would it matter if we can move our military equipment into Eastern Germany?
And
right?
to be clear, they have military equipment in Eastern Germany, do they not?
Well,
I don't know.
Are they playing that technicality where they don't have any?
I think that they have mostly abided by that. I think they may have like limited military equipment because that's part of the written deal.
Okay.
They certainly have not deployed nuclear weapons into Eastern Germany. All the nuclear weapons are at American air bases in the West still. So that's part of the written treaty. So they have respected that. But you see also how the written treaty there is written under the guidance of the spirit of the written, the spoken agreement, the handshake deal.
Yeah.
It's a moot point at this stage in the game as well.
Sort of, but
the front is so far beyond, that point.
Yes, but not moot in the sense that the war party says that, come on, they never had a deal. There never was a promise and you're lying and these are Russian talking points, but that's just not true. It's completely lazy history.
Yeah.
As you heard in that debate, I guess you guys saw it, where he goes, there was one conversation on one day between Baker and Gorbachev. Yeah, there were also a lot of other conversations on a lot of other days between a lot of other people. And just because he's ignorant about all that doesn't make it not true. They absolutely had a deal and they broke it. And that's the true history of it. And that's absolutely, of course, then the way that the Russians have seen it all along as well, that all of this was in violation of these solemn assurances. And including through the 90s, where Clinton sent his Secretary of State in 1993 to promise, we're doing the Partnership for Peace. We're not doing NATO expansion. And Boris Yeltsin about had a conniption fit. You tell Bill that I'm so enthusiastic. This is brilliant. He's a brilliant genius. This is the greatest idea anybody ever had in the history of the world. Go tell him I said that. A few months later, Bill Clinton comes out and says, the PFP is just the first step toward NATO expansion. You're halfway house when you're on your way. Yeah, and Yeltsin flipped out about it. That was in 93, 94. Again, homeboy says, oh, they never cared then. Yeah, they did too. They completely freaked out about it all through the 1990s. And anyway, so then W. Bush, he essentially just refused to accept Putin's good faith in attempts to,
after 9/11,
get in America's good graces and stay in them. Now, look, if you parse what I say carefully there, I'm talking about his good faith efforts to get his nation in sync with our nation, right? It has nothing to do with him. His good faith effort to babysit your daughter tonight or whatever. I didn't say he was deserved the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I said he was trying to get Russia along with the U.S. That's just true. And he was the first one to call W. Bush on September 11th and say, I'll do whatever you want. Now, remember, in Afghanistan, America was switching sides in the war, not Russia. So he said, oh, you want to use our bases in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan to help invade Afghanistan? Sure. And we'll give you maps of every trail we know. We'll give you all the intel we know about who's where and everything to help you invade and launch the war. They had their own problem with jihadist terrorism, as y'all know, for some reason. And he was taking the opportunity to try to get on America's good side and all that, try to get America on his same side in that against the jihadists that America had been backing all that time. And I mean, all that time, not just in the 80s in Afghanistan, but under Bill Clinton in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Chechnya as well. And then, the main things that Bush did was tear up, first of all, NATO expansion in 2004, further NATO expansion, 9 new nations, the Baltics and some of the Balkans and some others, the more Visegrad states. Then he tore up the anti-ballistic missile treaty. And this is really important. Now, you might think if it was just you, me, and your Uncle Bob, and we're just drinking beers, we go, look, of course, we want the U.S. government to have the ability to shoot down incoming ICBMs. Are you crazy? But that's not
obviously
right. Because what we're talking about is an arms race. This treaty was written by Richard Nixon back when the Soviet Union still stood. And the idea was the treaty limited both sides to a couple of anti-ballistic missile system sites. And the thinking was that if we build more and more defensive systems, then the other side's just going to build more and more offensive missiles. And we already have tens of thousands of missiles on each side. America had about 40 and America had about 30 and they had about 40 at the time, about 70 total, 1,000 H-bombs on missiles. And Nixon said, forget this, man. We can arms race this forever, right? We can go all the way till the world blows up. Or we could just call it off here. And a way to stop it was saying a limit on defensive missiles was one thing they were able to agree on then. So when W. Bush tore that up, we now know, and anybody could have guessed, and critics warned at the time, but we now know that the Russians Vladimir Putin embarked on a massive new nuclear weapons program because, and he later said in a speech, well, I had two choices. I could either try to match you by building an extremely sophisticated and expensive defensive missile system, or I could just build more offensive missiles, which is what he did.
The Peyton Manning Colts, you're just going all offense. Yeah.
Yep. And then see, when he tore up the ABM treaty, that also killed all the negotiations over START 2. The START 2 would have banned MIRV, multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles. Well, because MIRV 2 died along with, which was his father's treaty, Bush's father's treaty, he tore them both up. And then, so that what that meant then is the Russians built these massive, they call them Sarmat, heavy missiles that can carry apparently 36 independently targetable warheads on them, enough to kill all of Texas with one missile. Right. And they go around the South Pole where we have no early warning radars or defensive systems whatsoever. So on a surprise attack, you can kill. And for people not familiar, there's a reason all the cliches about Texas. It's absolutely humongous. It's as big as 6 other states or 7 or something.
It's big, it takes up a huge chunk of Europe.
Yeah, the picture of it overlaid over Europe.
Yeah. That's right. So, that's why we use Texas as an example for big things all the time. Is we have like 10 major cities and or more, and they could kill them all with one missile. One missile. So anyway, and underwater new drone torpedo H-bombs. They say a nuclear powered cruise missile with essentially unlimited range to fly around any defenses and go get you from the other side. And of course the hypersonics, which they've been working on for a long time, but these go upwards of Mach 10 and whatever, that beyond any defensive capability to shoot down. So, and then Bush did all these color-coded revolutions, overthrowing any government that was friendly to the United States. That's the big stuff. And then, and including Ukraine in 2004, Georgia in 2003, and Ukraine in 2004. This is a huge deal. Also, and I think, this goes vastly underreported, but this seems to be the final straw and the real break between Bush and Putin was when in 2004, the bin Ladenite terrorists from Chechnya committed the horrific Beslan school terrorist attack massacre. They took all these prisoners and killed them all. And then a bunch of them were killed by the cops when they raided the place and whatever. It was a disaster. And then Bush came out, and instead of saying kill all bin Ladenites, Bush came out and said, oh, geez, well, I urge restraint and negotiations and all of this stuff. Because America was back to the bin Ladenites in Chechnya. And they said, oh, no, they're just nationalists. No, they're head chopping, suicide bombing, Osama bin Laden trained and tied, Afghan traveling, Osama bin Ladenites. It's exactly who they are.
This is what isn't this what Putin referenced when Tucker Carlson interviewed him recently?
Yes.
He was kind of alluding to this. Yeah.
Time. Yes, he said this over and over again. And you notice he always says this when he brings this up. He says, come on, let's be adults about this.
Right.
That's what he says whenever he talks about something that he knows sounds kind of conspiratorial. But then, so he goes, listen, pour yourself a glass of brandy and listen up. America and Britain backed the terrorists in Chechnya. We know that. You know what I mean? Like, come on. What are you
just trying to level with you? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, who on this call right now is so naive to think that couldn't possibly be true?
Yeah. Right. Why would America do that? It is
too. Yeah, it is too. And it's
if you don't, you got to read Scott Horton's books. You got to read Fool's Errand.
And look, I had sources on this stuff. I had like one page on this in Fool's Errand. They're like, yep, Bill Clinton, the same time Al-Qaeda was attacking us all 90s long, he's still backing them in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Chechnya. And then I had a mess of footnotes at the bottom so you can go and check me. Well, in this case, each of those footnotes gets a chapter of its own, right? A section of its own. That's a little hyperbolic, but yeah, there are two major Chechnya sections in Clinton and in Bush chapters. And it's true. And apparently this, I believe this Anecdote, only because Putin has told it 2 or 3 different times, at least 2 times. And this is one I think that he mentioned to Tucker Carlson in that interview, was that he brought up to Bush, listen, like it's a fact. Your guys are backing the terrorists in Chechnya against us.
Yep, I remember this part.
And Bush is like, come on. And he goes, no, really, like my guys have seen your guys meeting with them in Azerbaijan and all of this stuff. And Bush understands that, oh, yikes, like this sounds true.
It's bad, yeah.
And so Bush says, I'll kick their ass for you. I'll make it stop. And then he says they get a letter from the CIA a few weeks later that says, nope, we can back whatever dissidents in your country we want to, and we're going to continue to and forget you. And now, so in the book, I quote George Friedman from Stratfor and others, very connected experts saying this was the break. The spirit of America's new relationship with Russia was completely broken after Beslan.
Mm-hmm.
Like how in the world? George W. Bush launched a war that killed 4 million people from Nigeria to the Philippines, forced 32 million people out of their homes, gave Baghdad to Iran, and then tried to give him and his buddy Obama tried to give Damascus to Al-Qaeda to make up for that fact. I mean, they turned the Middle East absolutely upside down. And in the name of, even when they were backing them, in the name of anti-terrorism.
Yeah,
but when it comes to Russia and Chechnya, they say you should negotiate. You should make a deal with these guys. Where even, American elites, including Zbigniew Brzezinski's son, wrote a thing in the Washington Post all about American support for the Chechens, Matthew Brzezinski, about how Mika's brother, about how crazy this is and how, like, I guess if you won't call it crazy, you just call it ironic. Right. Geez, guys, isn't it weird that we support this insurgency that's like a little bit nationalist, but very jihadist and all of its consequences? Like we're right in the middle of fighting a very nationalist and a little bit jihadist Sunni insurgency in Iraq, right at that exact time that they're backing these guys in Chechnya.
I've been keeping that in mind, Scott, as the last couple of days we've seen the news in Syria again, that these rebel forces are, taking Aleppo and this and that, whatever. And the first thing in my mind was when I just did a reread of your book. I'm like, are these the rebels that are ISIS and Al-Qaeda? Or are these a different group and they've now rebranded with a new logo and a new name and all that stuff?
Remarket themselves?
Yeah, they remarketed themselves years
later. I don't know how old you guys are, but this 30s, is Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
Yeah.
From Iraq War II.
There you go. Yep.
That's who they are. It's Al-Qaeda in Iraq, in Syria. Okay. So like if you have guys that fought in Iraq War II, there's a chance that they might have fought the Shiites under Muqtada al-Sadr in
good friend Stephen. Yeah. Fought in Iraq War II. Yeah.
Okay. So there's a chance that your guys may have fought against the Shiites in 2004, 2008. There are some limited engagements. This is all David Petraeus picking a fight with the same people he's fighting the war for because he's an idiot. And that's complicated. But in the broad strokes, America in Iraq War II fought for the Shiites against what was broadly termed the Sunni-based insurgency in the west of the country, in the predominantly Sunni areas of the country. And the worst vanguard of that was Al-Qaeda in Iraq under Zarqawi. Now, Bush lied and said that Zarqawi was sworn to bin Laden and to Saddam Hussein, and that's why we got to invade. But that wasn't true. He had told bin Laden, no, I don't want to join your group. And Saddam Hussein just had a bolo out on the guy, was not buddies with him at all. They had this whole fake story that Saddam had given him a peg leg in surgery in Baghdad, and all this stuff was totally fake. Okay, but that was what the neoconservative liars said, to use that term specifically. The guys, Bill Kristol's men at the Weekly Standard and so forth. And in the Department of Defense and the Vice President's office. But so later in the war, like a year and a half into the war, Zarqawi finally did declare his loyalty to bin Laden. And he became certainly the leader of the very worst part of the Sunni-based insurgency, which very much was just Iraqi and nationalist, but included a lot of foreign fighters as well. And it was, the very worst of the bin Ladenites were people from Saudi and Libya and Syria and other places in Egypt who traveled there to join with Al-Qaeda because they were that religiously / politically motivated to do so. Whereas local Iraqis were basically fighting for their own neighborhoods mostly.
Right.
You know what I mean? By and
Usually
large.
how it
Anyway,
goes.
so, but like when you think about Iraq War II and you think about suicide bombings and head choppings, this is who we're talking about, is the bin Ladenite vanguard of the Sunni-based insurgency. But see, you might ask yourself, but Horton, how come George W. Bush would fight a war for the Shiites there? Aren't they in alliance with Iran? And isn't that who the U.S. government hates in the region the most? And I would say yes. And the answer is because George W. Bush is stupid. And the neoconservatives are stupid. And the neoconservatives serve Israel. And they're stupid. And they had this idea that if they overthrew Saddam and empowered the Shiite supermajority in Iraq, that America's friends in Jordan and Turkey would somehow be, who are Sunnis, would somehow be dominant over these Shiites and make them bend over and kiss their ass and do whatever they said, which was a total pipe dream based on lies they'd been fed by Iraqi exiles who were trying to get them to get America to do their dirty work for them. But anyway, their promise was that we'll use our sway over the Iraqi Shiite clergy to force Hezbollah in southern Lebanon to stop being friends with Iran and start to make nice with Israel. That way, we can tear up the Oslo Agreement and steal all of the West Bank and Gaza Strip from the Palestinians, deny them their state, their freedom, their independence, and not have to worry about Hezbollah on their northern border.
That's interesting, right? You're seeing all that play out.
Now, who's Israel been worried about on their northern borders? They've been killing the Palestinians and stealing their West Bank and Gaza Strip for the last year.
Look how that turned out. Yeah.
Why? Because it didn't work. Their stupid clean break plan was stupid and it didn't work. And so instead of America and Jordan and Turkey having dominance and sway over the Iraqi Shiite supermajority, of course, Iran does. Not America and their allies. The Iranians do. So ever since about 2006, when W. Bush was just like, in his second term, really it was earlier than that. It was in 2005. He's beginning his second term, that Zalmay Khalilzad and Elliot Abrams and others of some of these neoconservatives said, hey, we screwed up here, man. We have to admit it. We are fighting a war for our regional rival that we hate. Oops. Like really big, all capitals, oops. Now what are we going to do? So they launched a program called The Redirection. And you can read all about this in Seymour Hersh in the New Yorker magazine from 2007. The Redirection. And what does it mean? It means we're switching back to the Sunnis. But what does that mean? That means we're switching back to the bin Ladenites. Right. Because the Saudi king doesn't have an army. We're his army.
Right.
Our GIs are his army. So if we're not sending American GIs into Syria, who are we sending to Syria? Bin Ladenites. And so that was who they sent. They called it a revolution. They called it a Syrian uprising, a civil war. No, wrong, lies. It was an invasion by terrorists, by bin Ladenite terrorists, backed by the USA, beginning only 6 years after they knocked our towers down, beginning while they were still killing our guys in Iraq.
Right.
We still had guys in Iraq fighting these guys.
And
on one side of the border, they were fighting them, and the other side, they were supporting them.
Right. And then by the time Obama comes, Bush gets this rolling, but by the time Obama comes, now we're doing everything we can to usher these guys out of Iraq into Syria. Whereas you just said, now they're heroes. Now they're moderate rebels. Now they're the Free Syrian Army of revolutionary, freedom lover, whatever they are. But all they are is the bin Ladenites. They're led by, to this day, a guy named Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, who fought American Marines in Iraq War II, and who was sent there by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who inherited Zarqawi's group, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, aka the Islamic State of Iraq. And it was Baghdadi who later declared himself the Caliph Ibrahim and the ruler of the caliphate. I'm skipping ahead, but the same guy. He sent Jawlani to found what was called al-Nusra in Syria. And they fought from 2011 through about 13 and a half. And about halfway through 13, there was a split between Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And what that really means is there was a split between Al-Qaeda in Iraq, in Syria, and just Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or like, I guess I should say the Syrian-dominated faction of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria, and the Iraqi-dominated faction of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria. And the Iraqis decided that rather than focusing on trying to sack Damascus, which had, too much armament, was too difficult of a target, they would instead create their own Islamic State in eastern Syria. And then that was in the summer, very early summer of 13. And it was 6 months after that you might remember they hoisted the black flag over Fallujah in Iraq. And like, you go back and listen to my radio show at the time and like, oh my God, we're all freaking out. Like, can't you see what's happening here? Like, this is wide open territory. Because see, when Bush gave Iraq to the Shiites, we're really only talking about the land from Baghdad to Iran. They kind of left predominantly Sunni Western Iraq wide open and just lawless, ungoverned territory. And so when the Islamic State, so they hoisted the black flag over Fallujah in January of 14. And somebody asked Obama about it. And Obama said, oh, ISIS, come on, man. Just because you put on a Kobe jersey, just because the JV team puts on a Kobe jersey doesn't make them the pros.
Right.
But which just
there, yeah.
Look, like Obama was horrible in so many ways.
Yeah.
But that's stupid. That goes to
Just
show
downplaying a threat.
Yeah, that goes to show how disinterested he was in what was going on, because he's a smart enough guy to know, as horrible as he is, he's literate enough that if he had been paying attention, he would know that Al-Qaeda in Iraq is not the junior varsity team. Al-Qaeda in Iraq did what bin Laden never could do. Bin Laden got, some special forces missions behind lines and things like that. Al-Qaeda in Iraq fought an insurgency for years against Americans, killed Americans by the thousands, and set an example for what an Islamist army on the ground could be in the imaginations of all of these people. And they killed, and man, the suicide bombing campaigns that they waged against the Iraqi Shia, as well as against American troops in that war. I mean, holy crap, man. You would just have to be willfully blind to the history of the Second Iraq War to be able to utter those words that don't you worry about ISIS. They ain't nothing. Ain't nothing. They're the most dangerous terrorists probably in the history of the world. You're crazy. Junior varsity team. Oh my God. And this is the guy driving. And he's one of the smartest ones we've had, as horrible as he is. At least he
portrayed himself as one of the smartest guys.
6 months later, this is the footage. Everyone listening has the picture in their brain. Remember the long convoy of Toyota Hilux pickup trucks on their way rolling into Mosul.
Yeah.
Who are they? What are they? That's Al-Qaeda in Iraq, in Syria, coming back to Iraq in trucks that Hillary Clinton bought them when they were moderate rebels on the Syrian side of the line. Now here they come to sack Mosul, and then they sacked Tikrit, Samarra, and Fallujah, and all of the major cities of Western Iraq, and Ramadi, and created what they called the Caliphate.
Right.
Which in the W. Bush days, this is like the most ridiculous propaganda. Oh, the Caliphate, Glenn Beck.
They actually were the ones who helped it come to fruition years later.
Yeah, there is no caliphate. Where are you going to put it? There's all nation states there. Like, what are you even talking about? This is make-believe. Barack Obama begs to differ. Barack Obama comes and builds them a caliphate. Okay,
now dead space for it to happen.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. So anyway, anybody looking at Twitter right now can see. I just tweeted this out. This group of Al-Qaeda terrorists just openly praise, and you would think they would have the public relations good sense to keep their mouths shut. They just openly praised Israel. So we love Israel. We thank Israel for bombing Hezbollah for us. You really opened up the opportunity for us to be able to take this land. And don't ever say that we hate Israel. We do not. We love them. They're great. I mean, this is on my Twitter feed. This is in the Times of Israel today. Al-Qaeda loves Israel. Because
as long as CNN doesn't say it, right?
They're reciprocating, guys. You see? And this goes to the heart of America's relationship with Israel. How could any American, and I don't care how Zionist you are, and that's not a synonym for Jewish, okay? There are plenty of Jews who don't give a damn about Israel.
False
plenty of Zionists who aren't Jewish at all, okay? How could any Zionist, how could any American, no matter how Zionist you are, how could you hate Hezbollah more than Al Qaeda?
Right. How could you take the side of Al
Hezbollah
Qaeda?
didn't knock
Yeah.
our towers down.
Yeah.
Hezbollah didn't knock our towers down. That was the Sunnis that did that. They did that because our government is too close to their governments. They did that because our government backed their terrorist groups for years, while at the same time motivating them to kill us too. And you're mad about Hezbollah that has never threatened the United States. It was like proto-Hezbollah that blew up the
Right.
barracks in 1983. But guess what? Israel knew it was going to happen and didn't warn us. So I don't want to hear it. And it's treason against the American people. It's treason by W. Bush. It's treason by Barack Obama. It's Trump at least let this continue more or less. I mean, he called off
Good
CIA
segue into a question
these
I have
guys.
for you too.
But yeah, he never forced Turkey to stop backing them and protecting them in the Idlib province for 4 years straight. And it's treason right now. And if it ain't, fine. I've read my Spooner. Israel doesn't owe American any loyalty whatsoever. Fine. But then it's treachery, and we don't owe them the slightest
we don't owe them
bit of
anything,
friendship or loyalty back either.
Except for everything that they own on
Once
us.
you scratch past the surface there, it's very evident that we don't. It's just a matter of people actually scratching the surface. This actually segues into what was going to be one of my last questions to you. But we talked about recently on an episode when Trump started picking his administration, and he had these horrible foreign policy picks at the very beginning. It just seemed very evident that Miriam Adelson's $100 million has been influential on who Trump has been picking in the foreign policy realm, at least. Do you think that there is some possibility that Israel will move full bore into the West Bank and try and complete that project? And part of that $100 million was, in a sense, is her, buying Israel the cover in the Trump administration to go and do that.
I absolutely share your concern about that. $100 million is a lot of money, and I don't know. I'm not sure what countervailing influence there could be on Trump. I mean, look, on one hand, I'm like, what are they going to do, man? They're just going to carpet bomb Ramallah and Bethlehem and just force all the Palestinians to flee. And then I'm like, yeah, right. Like, this is what they've done.
That's what they just did in Gaza, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and so they're doing this to 2 million Gazans. They can do it to 3 million West Bankians, right? Like, why not just do it? If from their point of view, with all the diplomatic cover that they'd have, the Europeans aren't going to actually intervene. They might, cry and complain about it. Now, I think honestly, the only real kind of counter incentive to them doing that, agreeing with your premise that they have all the cover from DC that they could ever want now with the incoming administration, would be that they've been trying to assemble this Sunni coalition against the Shiites. And if they go that far, then they can forget their relationship with the rest of the GCC. And I don't think that, they're going to unite and create a big Muslim army to come and try to stop them. I don't think they had the ability to do that. Be very doubtful that they would be able to join up and ally across sectarian lines. And ultimately,
you don't think that would rally the region if Israel were to go into the West Bank like that? You don't think that would rally the whole region behind the Palestinians in that regard?
But what are they going to rally? What can they rally and muster up to combat this?
My concern at the end of the day, of course, I have sympathy for the Palestinians and what was happening to them, right? But my concern at the end of the day is America and my family and my people. And I see all this as a route back to them of terrorism, of grievances.
That's right.
Of failures in the future that this foreign policy is making. So that's always my concern.
Right. Me too. Look,
like I've said before, it's not America first to set the conditions that will later harm America.
Yeah. Just creating new terrorists for the future.
I think that's right. And look, I mean, anybody who is honest and looks at what's happening in Gaza right now has got to be absolutely sickened by it. It's the level of sadism and cruelty that the Israelis deploy against and use against the people of Palestine is just the most sickening thing. It's the worst regime on the face of the earth. There's no question about that. There's really not. They're worse than the communist Chinese by far, just in terms of degenerate bloodlust, sinfulness, and sadism. the glee that they take in inflicting tortures on their captives. So
I saw
forth.
the
The
story
Chinese,
about the Israeli sniper shooting kids in the head.
absolutely.
The
I mean,
doctors saying it. It was a crazy story, man. It made me like actually physically nauseous when I read that story. Now, again, where to get a straight line on that, right? But it was a bunch of American doctors that were kind of confirming that story.
that's right. And look, I mean, and they published the X-rays in the New York Times. And the New York, the American doctor said he thought there was one mad sniper out there that was doing this, and then he started talking to other doctors, and they found out that no, this was going on all across the Gaza Strip, over and over, day in, day out, deliberately targeting children. There's never, if they were wearing all black with armbands and giving Hitler salutes, then you would recognize them. That's what this is.
Yeah.
This is National Socialism at war, and it's as ugly as can be. But you know what? Like, fine. Maybe you just absolutely, for whatever reason, believe whatever your idiot Sunday school teacher lady taught you when you were a little kid. Because after all, like, that was Jimmy's mom. She knows everything about the creator of the universe and his will, right? She's really smart, Jimmy's mom, who taught Sunday school. And she said, you have to do whatever Israel says. Okay, fine. But you know what? That's what caused September 11th. And you can sit here and say, oh, no, Jerry Falwell said it was because we allow men to be gay in America. And God is punishing us for that. Or, George Bush said that this is Islam's punishment for us having freedom. Because when Muslims look at America and they say, wow, here's this predominantly Christian country that has freedom of religion and absolutely protects the rights of this tiny minority, but still a huge minority of 3 million Muslims to practice their religion absolutely any way they want without interference whatsoever in any way ever. Oh, that drives them into
oppression.
If you actually just think about it, it makes no sense, right? Or the fact that someone would be driven to the point to blow themselves up because we wear blue jeans and like apple pie or something.
And because if they moved here, they could create their own mosque and worship at it however they
make
want.
their own life of freedom.
Logically, it makes no sense whatsoever.
Of course not. And that's how they always have to do. They always have to lie. They always have to pretend that they didn't have anything to do with motivating the attacks. They always have to put these cartoonish motives onto their others. Oh, Putin, who's been in power for 25 years, all of a sudden he just has this land.
Hitler. Yeah.
Like, you might think he was a Zionist. All he does is wake up in the morning plotting to rustle land from innocent peasants. Huh? Yeah.
But so we're doing the weave here. Actually, this is good. This brings me back to there was one moment in time.
Wait, let me just finish that one thing. Look, just like with Putin. Okay, I wrote a book, Provoked, about Putin. I'm not taking his side. I'm not saying he's justified. Right. I'm just saying that if you get into a shoving match with a gangster, don't be surprised if he knocks your block off. It's the same kind of thing with if you get in a shoving match with Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, George Bush, and Bill Clinton's suicide bomber, head chopper, terrorist murderers, that they might blow back and bite you. And look, our government was still backing Al-Qaeda in Kosovo and Macedonia up until August of 2001, up until 1 month before September 11th, into the W. Bush years. They're still back in the Bin Ladenites. But why would they turn against us? Ali Soufan has, he quotes Chechen terrorists telling Osama bin Laden, why do you want to target America? We like these guys. They helped us in Afghanistan. They helped us in Bosnia. They're helping us in Chechnya. Why do you want to attack them? And bin Laden's like, yeah, you just don't understand. He had this broader globalist, sort of Leninist revolutionary vision that centered around, of course, Saudi Arabia, the Holy Arabian Peninsula, land of Mecca, Medina, where American Christian combat forces were bombing and blockading Iraqis and killing them daily for a decade, as well as supporting Israel against the poor Palestinians and Lebanese. And there's an important story here about the lead hijacker Self from Hamburg, Germany. These were Egyptian engineering students studying for their advanced degrees in Hamburg, Germany, for their upper middle class professional life they were going to have. And they joined Al-Qaeda in spirit as soon as Shimon Peres launched Operation Grapes of Wrath in, I think it was July of 96. And then 2 days later, they did the Qana massacre. And guess what? It was Naftali Bennett was the one who called in the strike that killed 106 women and children at what's now called the first Qana massacre, because they did it again in 2006. But anyway, Bin Laden went off all about that in his first declaration of war in 1996, a couple months later. And when the guys in Hamburg read that, they said, this is our path. And that was how they decided to join. So you could absolutely hate Bin Laden as much as I do, curse his ghost, screw him, you know, killing him was probably the only
the kindest thing we could do
ever did in his life.
Right.
So consider him to be like the worst serial killer, the worst, most degenerate criminal ever. Still, why would anyone listen to him? Why would anyone do what he wanted? And the answer is not because he condemned us for being white and Christian and North American and innocent and free. The answer is because he pointed to specific American foreign policies like bombing Iraq from bases in Saudi Arabia, supporting dictators in the region, and helping the Israelis murder women and children in Palestine and Lebanon. That is why the 9/11 hijacker pilots joined Al-Qaeda, to get revenge for what America was helping Israel do in Lebanon. That's what brought those towers down. People go, oh, Israel brought the towers down. No, Israel motivated the Arabs that brought the towers down.
As we're going to get pulled off of YouTube now, probably. Yeah, that's an interesting point. And I think you see this, Scott, I'm sure you've seen a lot on the right, like the anti-woke, right. Where if you kind of make this point, like, you don't understand that these guys are humans and they're motivated by the same things that would motivate you as a human, right? Like your kids being killed, your countrymen being blown up and
fighting for your neighborhood.
Earlier. That is what is going to make you want to put on a suicide vest or fly an airplane into a building and kill people.
And by the way,
not these other things. And the fact that, for whatever reasons, it's bizarre. I mean, I've talked about it a little bit, like the fact that it is always tied to these anti-woke guys that can't seem to understand this. It's curious, but they are humans at the end of the day. And they are fueled by those sorts of things.
Hey, just look at what happened after September 11th. Yeah, 1 million men went and joined the army, including Americans.
It's the same exact thing.
Including Muslims. American Muslims went and joined the U.S. Army because they found solidarity with the victims in New York City because they're Americans.
Right.
Same thing.
So, okay. So let's weave back quick to Ukraine. I got one question I've been dying to ask you for a while now. And then Chris, you got one, and then we'll wrap it up. I don't want to keep it too long, Scott. But I've had maybe a million debates since the war has broken out on Twitter with, especially like those NATO idiot guys and just people in general. I've learned to now kind of just let it go and not respond to certain people because you can't change their mind. But one of the things that was always one of the things I would usually talk about is back during like the Maidan revolution time, there was that phone call between Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt, right? And I read that transcript. I listened to it. It seems clear as day that they're discussing who gets to go in the new government in Ukraine. And for when people have said America didn't, stage a coup there, I'm like, you literally fucking have American diplomats discussing who is going to be in charge in the Ukrainian government. What is that? What does that look like to you? What is that to you? And the counter argument I've gotten to that before is that no, they actually weren't trying to oust President Yanukovych. They were trying to protect him and help him figure out who his prime minister was going to be. And it's way more complicated, the context of the phone call, besides whatever it is that you've read in the transcript. That was always like the counter argument to me. And you then just can't debate debate the person anymore. That's it. It's the end of the conversation in a sense, because they're so what would be your, what was your understanding of that or your counter argument to that?
Sure. Okay. So I explain all this in the book, by the way, if you want to see the breakdown.
I'm working on reading it. I got 2 kids though, so I haven't gotten very far yet.
Understandable. It's a beast of a thing. It was going to be a short little monograph at the beginning. What happened? Look, it's a little bit complicated, right? Like there's some truth in the other side of the story there, but you're ultimately correct. What was going on was they were discussing the calls from January, and they're discussing who should be in the new government. And so the argument from the other side is that, notice they're not saying who should be the new president. They're saying who should be the new prime minister and the role of the 3 major protest leaders. And she's saying, Nuland is saying she doesn't want Tannibach, the Nazi, from the Social National Svoboda Party. And Klitschko, she thinks, is not experienced enough. He'll later become mayor. But she's saying Yatsenyuk, that's the guy that we want, and we want him to be the prime minister because he's the one with the technocratic experience, really, to administer the government in the way that we want. And so people say that all they're discussing essentially is a proposal by Yanukovych, who had dismissed his, or was going to, or had dismissed his prime minister, about negotiations of who to replace him. In other words, a compromise where the protest leaders would be brought into the government temporarily. However, first of all, that's already a coup in a way anyway. We're talking about the Americans are deciding who should be the new prime minister in the deal, and they're using every bit of weight and influence that they can to twist Yanukovych's arm and force him to give in to their plans for his country. So this is already the world's worst outrage. I don't know what you call it in French exactly.
So in a sense, they would have worked with Yanukovych had he worked with them. They didn't give a shit who it was. They just wanted somebody who would have worked with them.
Well, yeah. Well, okay, now you're going back a couple months in the timeline, but just hold that thought. At this point, we're talking about January, February of 14.
Which, by the way, is when the Hunter Biden pardon goes back to right around that date. Yeah.
Can't
imagine why, huh?
Anyways, on a totally unrelated note, so America has overthrown the government there, and but here's the thing: he had just made an offer that they had rejected outright. I show in the thing. The protest leaders said, we absolutely refuse to talk to this guy or negotiate with him. And he had not offered Tannibach a role in the government anyway, in his offer, which they had immediately dismissed. In other words, the protest leaders, and it very well could be interpreted to mean Newland and Pyatt on that phone call too, that they were holding out for a whole new deal to replace him, and that they were certainly that the protest leaders didn't want to settle for less than that. The Americans and the Europeans ended up forcing Yanukovych to sign a deal where he would stay in office but would hold early elections by the end of the year. And so that was the deal that they essentially got him to accept, that included pulling his forces back on the promise that the protest side would pull their forces back. And of course, he was an idiot for falling for that, because once he pulled his forces back, they did not. They just rushed forward and ended up seizing all the government buildings and forcing him to flee and took over in what was essentially like a street putsch. So in other words, Newland herself did not do a coup in the absolutist literal sense where like they paid a general to kidnap or kill the president and take his place, right? It was a street putsch by a bunch of Nazis who had been supported by the U.S. and who had forced him to accept this deal, this compromise deal that ended up being his undoing. So it was not all just like super as cut and dry as could be. It was a complicated mess. But the point being that, one, they had no legitimate role to play there or legitimate authority to exercise in helping to choose this government anyway. And at the time that they're recorded in that phone call, they seem to be discussing the protest leaders' insistence to essentially wait. Like they've already rejected Yanukovych's offer. And so they're talking about, we don't know exactly the time frame in the entire conversation of what they're talking about the new government should look like. Just because they don't address who the new president should be doesn't mean that they're not talking about under the new president. Right. Although you could argue that they're saying once we get him to agree to the deal to hold new elections, still they're saying he has to accept their choice for prime minister. So
yeah, at the end of the day, they're still meddling. They're still dictating how it's going to go.
Yeah,
which is ironic because that's exactly what they're accusing Putin of doing. In general.
Yeah, it's a coup day. Foreigners pick your prime minister, and you have to hold an early election. So
yeah,
you know what I mean? I don't know. And then
on top of the fact that she was like physically there as well, along with other U.S. politicians were on the ground there. Murphy here, my My guy, my senator in Connecticut, one of my favorite guys ever, was there. Yeah.
And leveling sanctions and threatening more and pouring in hundreds of millions of dollars, financing the entire revolution out on the Maidan. You know, all of the food and all of the heat and all of the
logistics,
stage shows and all of the organization to keep the whole thing going. Super expensive. And it's the NGOs that pay for all that, led by the National Endowment for Democracy.
Yeah. It's a pretty illogical argument then, without a doubt. Cap, you have one more question you want to ask.
Final question of the night. Want to move away from the war, even though this, obviously affects the war and is going to change the landscape of what's going on in the world. The election's over. Trump won. I know you're not his biggest fan. So I wanted to get your opinion and your view on what you think the future of the country's going, what it looks like. How do you feel about his administration picks? And where's this libertarian that's going to fit into his administration?
One he promised us, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's
for the record, I was hoping it was going to be you. We didn't have someone back. We did our picks. We made our picks. Which libertarian could it be? I did pick you, Scott.
Yeah. Well, who would you like to see in there? That's one thing. Who could it be? You could take me right off of that list.
We're rooting for you, pal.
I mean, I think it's fair for all of us to rejoice in the crushing defeat of the Democrats first. They deserve to lose so damn bad. And really, it would have been better if they'd been crushed like this in 20. Right. After they called him a Nazi and they called him a Russian spy and they impeached him and they lied about the laptop. They should have lost by 20 points anyway then. They should have lost all 7 swing states then. That would have been the ultimate, just crushing, humiliating defeat for the Democrats and the establishment that they really deserve. I mean, imagine Martha Raditz's tears that night. This is how 2020 should have been, quite frankly. So there's that. I mean, I haven't hated the Democrats this much since the Clinton years. I mean, I despise them so bad I could spontaneously combust. So just knowing how miserable they are
makes you happy.
Like very heartening to me. Yeah. Like every upper middle class liberal white woman on her pills and on her couch right now, I take such pleasure in their pain. Yeah. And look, I'm a case of arrested development here, right? I'm a horrible, hateful child, and I want them to all just
suffer
that whole bottle
like Cartman drinking the kids' tears
out of their misery. All of them. So there's that. Now that I got that off my chest, we need Thomas Jefferson. We need Ron Paul. And instead we get Andrew Jackson or, Huey Long or Rudy Giuliani or whatever Donald Trump is. I think he's Rudy Giuliani. And remember, Ron Paul's great triumph was stomping Rudy Giuliani into the ground. Trump is essentially an Israeli agent dressed up like Pat Buchanan. And he's, I'm plagiarizing that from Arthur Bloom. He calls him, I'll be more polite than Arthur Bloom. Calls him the Israel lobby and Buchanan face, which I think is right. And so we're going to see just a horror show in Israel, Palestine. I think I'm extremely hopeful that we'll get a deal with Russia and with possibly even North Korea, but maybe not. It could be that North Korea's role in the Ukraine war has ruined chances for rapprochement there. And which, by the way, sorry to remind everyone, but if they had lightened up on Trump at the time and allowed Trump to make a deal with North Korea back 8 years ago, then, or 6 years ago, whatever it was, then this wouldn't be a problem right now. We wouldn't be talking about Ukraine's role helping Russia fight Ukraine because Donald Trump would have been friends with Rocket Man.
Is that even true, man? I have not seen compelling evidence that there are North Korean soldiers there.
I haven't either, honestly. There's a ton of reports. People
have sent me videos of Asian-looking dudes and be like, "You see, that's proof." I'm like, "It's an Asian-looking guy." There's Asian people in Russia. It's a large country.
Look at a map, dude. It's a Eurasian nation, and yes, there are Eastern Russians who look very Asiatic, of course.
Right.
Anyways, I'm hopeful that he can get a deal with Ukraine and possibly with North Korea. Trump, you know what, man? Like, you guys know the dynamic. Only Nixon can go to China, right? People say that. What that means is, for people too young, is because Nixon was an anti-communist. and had, helped hoist up the crucifix for well, that's too redundant to say. Sorry. The crucifixion. He hoisted the cross for the crucifixion of Alger Hiss, who deserved it. Screw him. But I'm just saying, so everybody knew that Nixon's no commie. And that means Nixon can go and shake hands with Mao Zedong. And you're not going to be able to say that it's because he's a commie or he's soft on commies. It must be because he saw wisdom in doing so, in representing America's national interests. Right. And when he came home, by the way, the New York Times said, "Congratulations, Mr. President, you did the right thing," and supported him for it, which you wouldn't get that today.
No.
But so on that basis, only Nixon can go to China. And this is not a prediction, but this is just a description of what could be. Trump could go to Moscow. He could go to Beijing. He could go to Tehran. He could go to Pyongyang, and he could just simply make peace. He could just say, "Listen, man, I'm the tallest, richest, most successful, handsomest, greatest president since Abraham Lincoln, and I can do whatever I want. Mr. Ayatollah, let's figure this out. I'm picking a runway. Air Force One headed toward Tehran. We want runway 3, and we want a meeting with the Ayatollah. What's he going to do? Turn him away?
Yeah.
We want a meeting with the Ayatollah. And all Donald Trump has to do is go, look, I'm the tallest, richest, most successful, greatest president since Lincoln. And I say, I'm not afraid of the Ayatollah. We can make a deal with him. And then just do the same thing in Moscow and do the same thing in Pyongyang and do the same thing in Beijing. He's met with Chairman Xi numerous times, fed him the sweetest, richest chocolate cake in the whole wide world before. They can get along. And Donald Trump is, in that Nixonian way, can go to China. Forget all the crap you heard about him being a Russian agent.
Yeah, well.
He's not. He's an American agent. Well, he's an Israeli one, but in dealing with China, he can represent just simply America's interests and make a deal. And someone said to him recently, and I hope Miriam Adelson didn't hear this and reprimand him, but someone asked him, could we make a deal with Iran? And he said, yeah, we can make a deal with Iran as long as they don't make nuclear weapons. Was like, guess what? They signed a non-proliferation treaty in 1968, dude. We're all good.
I think it was Patrick Bet-David, maybe. And he was like, I want Iran to be a prosperous place. I want them to do good.
Yeah.
Wow. That's different. I never heard that before.
I got to tell you, man, listen, I'm obsessed with being right, but I'm only obsessed with being right now. I don't care if I was ever wrong before. I don't care if I got to change my mind. Donald Trump wants to go and make peace with Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. He'll be Donald Trump the Great.
Please do.
And defend him for the rest of his 4 years. But he hired a bunch of hawks to surround him.
Right.
So he could do that either to protect his right flank and make peace anyway, or he could just let a bunch of horrible hawks ruin his
create more war. Yeah.
We'll have to see.
All right.
Very
cool.
Scott, want to tell everybody where they could get your book? I am going to put the link also in the description, but why don't you shout it out?
Absolutely. Well, it's at Amazon. You get the paperback or the Kindle. If you stop by scotthorton.org and click the link from there, I'll get an extra little kickback. Or if you, I guess in my pinned tweet at Scott Horton Show, that link also, I'll get an extra little kickback from Amazon's end of the sale there if you want to do that. Otherwise, it's just search Provoked Scott Horton. And it's my telling of everything that Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, McCain, and Hillary did to cause this. And it truly is their fault, at least as much as the Russians who reacted to their provocations. It's a sad story. It really is.
Yeah. Most definitely.
All right.
But I hope you like it. I worked hard on it. So by the labor theory of value, it should be really good.
There we go. All right, Scott, thank you so much for coming on. It's always a pleasure. We always learn so much when you come on. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you both very much.
Ditto.
All right. Any last words, Skaggs?
That's it.
All right, Doom Nation, thank you guys for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We will be returning next week with another episode for you. As always, make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and adios.